everyone, and welcome to the next part in this series on how to write a paragraph. In this part, we'll look at the building blocks or the components of a well-written paragraph. So as we mentioned in the last part, paragraph has three components. First, you always want to introduce your paragraph's main idea. This is called the topic sentence. You'll provide details, data, and specifics to support that topic idea. Those are the body sentences. And then some paragraphs finish with an idea that helps remind the reader what the topic's main idea was. This can be particularly useful in a long or complex paragraph, so we would call that a concluding sentence. And sometimes the writer wants to show a relationship between the current paragraph and the next paragraph, so that would be a transition sentence. And sometimes you can do both of those at once. These are optional, and not all paragraphs have them because it can sound robotic to always conclude your paragraphs. But you can use your discretion as a writer of when it's effective and helpful to do so. Okay, so there are a couple things to remember about topic sentences. The first thing is that they should state a single controlling idea of the paragraph. That means just one idea, not 2, 3, or 4, or however many you want to put in there. Just state one, and then focus that paragraph, the remainder of the body sentence of that paragraph, on that idea. It's actually very common, probably one of the most common mistakes, is to introduce an idea in a paragraph, give a little bit of evidence, and then switch to a topic that, although it's related, it's not exactly on target with what the paragraph was aiming to do. You have to look at your paragraphs critically and evaluate whether you're staying on topic. The best way to do this is to put your work down and look at it again later with fresh eyes, because you don't have all the connections in your brain that you had while you were reading and writing everything, and it's easier to spot when you go off topic. The second thing to remember about topic sentences is they should be clear, specific, and interesting. A topic sentence that just states a very general, vague idea doesn't give the reader enough direction to anticipate what's going to come in the paragraph. This can make the reading a little bit confusing and frankly just boring. Let's take a look at some examples to see what we mean. So one example of a topic sentence that's not very helpful to the reader would be something vague or overgeneral. Here, for example, the writer just said motif investing is good. A lot of times when you see these words good, bad, great, and similar words, or a lot of times even just any adjective without any support, is not enough information for the reader. So even if we said something like motif investing is terrible, that wouldn't really be a useful topic sentence. We'd like to be a lot more specific. What exactly are we talking about? So let's imagine in this paragraph we're contrasting motif investing with ETFs. We might say motif investing provides higher returns than traditional ETF investing. Or we could argue the other way around, but in either case, we would have to provide the details and the data to back that up in the paragraph. And regardless of which way we're arguing, with this kind of topic sentence, the reader knows exactly what's coming in the paragraph, and it piques more interest than that first sentence. Another example of a poor topic sentence would be something that's just very bland, uninteresting, and still vague or non-specific. For example, this paragraph will discuss Chipotle. I don't recommend probably ever using that kind of introduction for your topic sentence because it's just too general. The same thing with concluding sentences. It's usually not a good idea to say in conclusion, especially in a body paragraph. Try to use more interesting wording. Try to weave your ideas together in a more unique and creative way than this. It'll keep your readers more interested and most likely will be providing more specific and useful information. So let's look and see how we can improve this. A more specific option that also should be more interesting: the projected increases in Chipotle's ROIC make the company an attractive investment option. So what does the reader know here? Well, the reader still knows that we're talking about Chipotle, but we didn't actually have to say that we're going to discuss it. It's just obvious and implied from the topic sentence. And in addition to that, the reader knows specifically that we're going to talk about how ROIC makes it an attractive investment option. And the paragraph will focus on ROIC and how that's a good thing for potential investors in the author's opinion. So let's look at one more example of a poor topic sentence. This is one actually that I will say that I've exaggerated this. I just made the sentence up, but I see this kind of aimless strategy a lot of times where the writer introduces a topic and attaches a lot of unnecessary details, sometimes even irrelevant information, and a ton of extra words. So although this looks like a paragraph, this is actually one sentence. And although it's exaggerated, I have seen topic sentences probably almost as long as this. So the explanation for the recession in the economy of the world was the poor decision-making by top bank leaders who had begun to decide to give permission for the extension of bad subprime loans that were highly likely to fail, and therefore the people who were naive enough to take the bad loans were probably not going to be able to pay them even when digging deep in their pockets, and therefore a lot of people were forfeiting on loans, and this had a domino effect, and before you know it, people were going bananas, and banks were facing the music, and companies were looking the other way, and meanwhile the global economy was crashing and burning, and this topic sentence is awesome. Okay, so you know that your topic sentence is way too long if you have to stop and take a deep breath somewhere in the middle, maybe even more than once. So unless you're an Olympic swimmer and you can hold your breath for 6 or 7 minutes or whatever they can do, I don't think most people would be able to read throughout this without pausing at least once. Clearly, there's way too much information in here. We can point out a lot of ways that the reader has not been concise. There's redundancies, for example, decision-making, decide. We have a 2-word verb instead of a 1-word verb with give permission instead of allow, or something similar. We have a lot of prepositions and nouns, like in the economy, of the world, for the extension of bad subprime loans, and then there's more of them as we go forward. When you have a lot of prepositions and nouns strung together, you're going to make the reading very choppy, and your readers are probably just going to put the document down. So of course this is exaggerated, but you can see the difference between something crazy like this and something in our previous slide, which is still pretty concise, but it is specific and clear and interesting. So try to stick to those types of topic sentences instead of the bad examples that we looked at here. Okay, so one last thing I'll say about the topic sentences is that the style of the topic sentence depends a little bit on which kind of paragraph you're writing. So if we return back to this idea of tell paragraphs and claim paragraphs, so in tell paragraphs, you're basically just introducing the subject that you're going to talk about or describe in the paragraph. That doesn't mean that your topic sentence should be very vague or boring, because you might have a few paragraphs discussing the same theme, but you're discussing particular aspects of that theme. So if you're writing a few paragraphs on a bank instrument, then the first paragraph might talk about one aspect and the topic sentence could be about that, and then the next paragraph would talk about another aspect. It could be benefits or cons or different applications of that instrument, and you would focus on whatever topic you wanted to talk about there. So your topic sentences could be specific. For claim paragraphs, you have to be a little more careful. Although you're still trying to be specific and clear and interesting in your tell paragraphs, in your claim paragraphs you have to very clearly and specifically state your mini argument or your assertion for that paragraph so that the reader knows what to expect, and you'll have to defend that argument with evidence. And you can't defend your claim very well if your claim isn't specifically and clearly stated to start with. Let's just revisit a couple of examples from the paragraphs that we had before, but now we've got the topic sentence highlighted. Something interesting here is that although this is a simple descriptive paragraph, there's one word in this topic sentence that makes it a little more detailed and interesting than otherwise. So if you want to pause your video and take a look and see which word you think that is, go ahead and do that. Okay, so the answer is the word busy. If we take that word out and we just say Wall Street is a place, of course we don't have a sentence. But let's say we switch to a different topic sentence like, this paragraph will discuss Wall Street. The reader doesn't know what aspect of Wall Street you're focusing on, and there's a lot that we could say about Wall Street. We could probably write a book on it. Probably there are a lot of books on it. So by saying Wall Street is a busy place, the reader automatically knows, oh, okay, the writer is going to focus on the busyness. So the sentences should do that. I didn't actually evaluate whether this paragraph is doing that. I just grabbed some of these excerpts from Wikipedia and threw a topic sentence in for the purposes of example. But the rest of the paragraph really should talk about how many people work there, maybe how many people walk up and down the sidewalk in a given hour, how many business transactions are performed there. Things like that would show how busy it is. And this is a more focused paragraph than, for example, just mentioning some 3 or 4 different and not necessarily connected facts about Wall Street in general. For a narrative story, I'll admit that this topic sentence isn't so exciting, but James P. Gorman rose to the position of CEO at Morgan Stanley, so this is a descriptive paragraph. And a lot of times claim paragraphs are a little more interesting. You don't want to argue something in every paragraph necessarily, but if we take a look, for example, how we can change this into a claim, James P. Gorman worked hard to rise to the position of CEO at Morgan Stanley. Now, this is much different because we've added the idea of working hard, and that's really an assertion that we're making, so we would have to defend that. Maybe we would explain how I don't know what he did. Maybe he started in the mailroom and worked his way up over 25 years and put in his time in different ways. But that would be an interesting narrative story to tell, and it sounds a little more interesting to me than just using the general descriptive approach. However, it might make sense. It depends on what kind of document you're writing, so you would want to choose between the two for whatever fit better. An example of the argumentative one, we looked at this one before, but highlighted here. One reason that Abenomics has failed is that Japan's inflation rate has worsened, so we talked about that in the previous slide, and this I just wanted to show again so you can see in the context of our previous discussion how this is specific and clear. Similarly, we have another specific and clear idea here with the argument about the fall in asset prices. So just remember that your topic sentence state one idea, and that's the idea that controls the rest of the paragraph, so you should stay on topic. The reader knows exactly what's coming, and it will have an easier time following your ideas this way. Alright, great. Let's move on to some body sentences. So, some things to be aware of when you're writing your body sentences. Things that you do want to do: provide details, data, and specifics like we talked about before. Keep everything related to your topic sentence and use specific, clear, and precise language. The don'ts are obviously the opposite of all of these. There's a couple of reasons that I'm revisiting these points again. One is that even if you create an awesome topic sentence that's specific, clear, and detailed, but you don't follow it up with any meat, any substance, any specific information or details, then the topic sentence is useless as well. So the first step is to have a clear, specific topic sentence, but then you have to support it. Details, data, and specifics. If you can only remember one thing about body sentences, remember that. Details, data, and specifics. So a lot of times in finance or business, you'll be using numbers, facts, and figures to support your ideas. That's great. And you can also use non-numeric, just specific examples. For example, if you were writing a paragraph and recommending Macy's as a strong buy for this quarter, then you wouldn't want to use vague sentences like Macy's is a good company. Instead, you use some detail, like whatever financial indicators you're using to make your argument. You give some numbers, then maybe give an example of how investing in this company has worked in previous quarters, and investment environment is similar to those quarters. So that would be a specific example of how it might make sense to invest in them for this quarter. That's much more detailed and useful to the reader than just saying that they're good. So the opposite of the do's, of course, is the don'ts. Try not to use those general types of sentences that don't say anything. Some of you have probably mastered that in high school and college, but when you move into the real world, you have to fill your reports and blurbs and whatever correspondence or documents that you're writing with real information. You need to actually say something meaningful, and to do that you have to be clear, specific, and detailed. Try to also, of course, stay on topic as we mentioned. Alright, let's look at some examples. So I know this is a bit small, but I just grabbed a paragraph from, I think it was a World Bank report, and then I just added a sort of my own version of a topic sentence as an example. Cambodia's rice mills have dramatically increased their production capacity over the past 6 years. So let's do our little check of topic sentences. Is it specific? Yeah, it looks pretty specific because we're talking about production capacity in a specific time. Is it clear? I think so. And is it interesting? Well, everybody has their own opinion on that, but I think that because of the clarity and the specificity, this would be interesting in the context of a document that the reader has chosen to look at to begin with. So let's take a look at the body sentences. Do we have specifics? Well, just looking here, I can see we have a time period. We have some sort of number with a production unit. We have an amount here. We have time, different types of ships. And we have, again, tons, numbers, percentages. And even when we get away from the numbers to the rest of the sentences here, where there's a pretty good chunk here that don't have numbers, does that mean it's bad? No, not at all, because if we look here, we see that there are a lot of specific examples. For instance, however, overall milling capacity utilization is very low. While many of Cambodia's larger mills are of comparable size with those of Thailand, the Thai factories usually operate 24 hours a day, blah, blah, blah. So there's a specific comparison here. We have another number. The operating capacity of Cambodian millers is curtailed first and foremost due to working capital limitations. So here the writer didn't just say that the millers are curtailed in their productivity in general. He or she mentioned that this is due to working capital limitations, so this is a specific example. They could probably even defend that a little more, but at least it's specific. Additionally, relatively limited storage and drying capacities need to be extended. So instead of saying that the factories need to be bigger, they specifically mentioned the storage and drying capacities, and that would allow 3 shifts. So there's, again, very specific information in each of these sentences. That's the kind of, if you're not going to use numbers, that's the kind of data that you want to provide, so specific examples. Okay, so this is a pretty well written paragraph. There's a lot of substance there, and it seems to be on target with the topic ID that was introduced in the first sentence. Okay, so now that we've discussed our topic sentences and our body sentences, let's move on to concluding and transition sentences. First thing to remember about these is that they're optional. Not all paragraphs have them. It can be quite helpful, but you do have to use your discretion and decide when they'll be most useful and helpful to the reader. Otherwise, you can start to sound like a robot where you're using a concluding thought to repeat the topic sentence in every paragraph. Let's take a look at them one by one. So concluding sentences are when you restate the topic ID in a unique, meaningful way for the reader. It doesn't mean copying and pasting your topic sentence. Usually you write it in a different way, and usually you try to do it in a way to reinforce the paragraph's main idea. So you might remind the reader how all of that body evidence that you just gave supported the topic sentence. This can be particularly helpful in long or complex paragraphs where maybe the reader was processing so much of that great information and details that you had that it helps to remind them what it all relates back to. Transition sentences can be helpful to create a link between the current paragraph and the next paragraph. It helps clarify the connection between the ideas, and it makes it easier for the reader to follow the logical progression of your argument or your document. Again, both conclusion and transition sentences are optional, so you want to decide when they're most useful. Some paragraphs you might want to conclude, some paragraphs you might want to transition, some paragraphs you might want to do both. You can combine them, actually, where the first half of the sentence would conclude the paragraph and the second half would sort of ease the reader into the next idea. We can take a look at an example of this combined approach here, where in the first paragraph, let's say that the writer wrote about the Cambodia's rice mills increasing in number. So that's a little different because that long paragraph that we looked at a few slides ago was talking about increased production capacity, not increasing in number. And this is similar to the original document with the World Bank report, where they had a paragraph that I believe was talking about increases in number. I just created this myself here for the purposes of example. But imagine that we have Cambodia's rice mills have increased in number, and then we have supporting body sentences that provide details, data, and specifics about their increases in numbers. Maybe their increases in numbers nationally, in particular major cities in the country, things like that. And then at the end of the paragraph, they might say something like, Cambodia's rice mills are becoming not only more prolific, but also more productive. So the first half of the sentence refers back to that main idea of the current paragraph, of increasing in number. And the second idea refers to the next paragraph, so the reader already knows that we're going to move into something about production. And then the next paragraph does have its own topic sentence, which we saw before. Cambodia's rice mills have dramatically increased their production capacity, blah, blah, blah. And then move on to the data, details, and specifics that we saw before. So that's one approach. Of course, just like the individualized approach of using a concluding sentence by itself or a transition sentence by itself, you don't want to use this combined approach too often. You have to pick and choose what's most useful for and helpful for the reader. So just remember not to overuse any of them, but also it is important to use them when it is helpful to do so. So this is a bit of an art. It will take some practice, and as you write more and work on your transitions and flow of ideas, it will become easier for you. Okay, well, we'll end this part here, and we can talk a little bit more about transitions within the body of the paragraph in the next video. See you there.